What's up, YouTube? Another voiceover league because I forgot to hit record before I started this one. I really like doing the live recording leagues and posting those straight up, but a lot of the times I'm just like not thinking about recording when I hop into a league. So that's when we go back and do the voiceovers like this, especially if the league involves like something interesting, whether it be a unique matchup or some interesting decision lines, something like that. That kind of makes it stand out. Because ultimately, the list right now is, at least for me, pretty stock. Like, I haven't changed much on this list in a couple weeks. And I don't think I've had anything but 4-1s with it. Like, the very first league we played with Breach, I think we had a 3-2, and then we cut the third breach, cut something else, moved the spell pierces to the main, and it's been literally nothing but 4-1 since. Which, on one hand, is great. 80% win rate, I'm never going to complain about. But on the other hand, I wouldn't mind like the occasional 5-0, just to throw a wrench in there, change it up a little bit. But ran through another league with the deck last night, and so I'm doing the voiceover of that, so you can kind of see some more Grixis Shadow gameplay with these underworld breaches. Um, Really nothing unique to say about the list. Like, I really like the 2 underworld breaches instead of the 3. I think when you get to 3, you start finding a second one way more often than you want, and so you get kind of pressured into like valuing the first one, and then the second one becomes worse. Um, and that kind of contrast isn't really hitting with me. The ledger shredders, you could easily go up to 4 if you wanted to cut something out, like terminate an unholy heat, whatever, spell pierce to the board. But ledger shredder for me has not been my favorite card to cast, so I'm a little bit lower on it than a lot of people. Um, One of the things I'm planning on trying out a little more is maybe not running Gigantha and running like Seasoned Pyromancer, but I just haven't gotten to a build that I really like. So in the meantime, running back this sideboard, exact same as my last league: 2 Dress Down, 2 Pierce, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Turok, Alpine Moon, couple Terminate, EE, 2 Unlicensed Hearse. Uh, the only change I would probably consider making in the board is finding room for the second engineered explosives, possibly over like the second Turok if we're seeing less white. But Turok's been really good for me against the Solitude matchups, and EE's been less than stellar recently. So this is just kind of what I've been running with. Other than that, let's go ahead and hop into the replays. We'll get rid of the chat bubble since we don't have no chat at the moment. And I believe this is, match number 1. Minimize here. So lose the die roll. There you go. Full screen action. I want to use the full screen more in like actual streams. Speaking of which, if you ever want to catch a live stream, right down in the description of the video, we'll have the link to the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/the_control freak, spelled just like the YouTube channel. We'll also have a link to the deck list and link to the Discord if you ever have any questions, comments, want to talk Shadow. That's where you can find me. Opening hand, it's fine. Like, no blue for Shredder is a little awkward, but we've got this double Ragavan plus a Bolt. So if Ragavan connects, we can like double spell Shredder plus something next turn. If they have an answer to Ragavan, we can play second one. If we need to kill something, we have Lightning Bolt. If we're expecting like a Renin 6, maybe we lead on Channeler, get the down tick, dash the Ragavan. We've got options. So basic forest utopia sprawl naming green. The name green is really awkward here because I would expect like a Blood Moon deck, a Ponza style deck, to forest utopia sprawl name red because you usually don't have a lot of if any double green cards in the deck. Usually looking at like Chandra, Seasoned Pyromancer, uh, Bone Crusher Giant to cast both halves in a turn where you really want double red. So the name green is like maybe this isn't Ponza. Kind of the same thing with like Heliod Company decks. They'd play Utopia Sprawl, but it's usually naming white because you've got like Sanctifier on Vec, Oriok Champion, Heliod's white, uh, Giver of Runes. You don't really have a lot of need for double green. So my hunch is that this uh isn't Heliod or Ponza and Nykthos. So Nykthos second Utopia Sprawl is screaming like mono green devotion. Uh Iteration was a good draw. Second land to get a blue source was an even better draw. So now we can double spell. We hit Burning Tree Emissary off their library. Decide to cast it for the free creature. We don't get a Ledger Shredder trigger here with this, but we just get a free 2/2. And like, I think getting the free 2/2 is a little bit better at the moment. So Summoner's Pact goes to get a Burning Tree Emissary. So I'm assuming this is for Nykthos purposes. Get rid of the extra Ragavan because they're playing to the board. Ave, like Aether, I guess. Progenitor, Progenitor Ooze. So modern staple, Progenitor Ooze. 2 and 3 green. Storm isn't legendary if it's a token, so the extra copies are able to stick around. Enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. So every copy you get off Storm gets bigger. Pretty cool. So on our main phase, we're gonna iteration. We could have like upkeep to bolt. Um, I don't think it's like the most important thing in the world. We're not about to die to these. So Ben Shadow. Shadow's pretty clogged up on the ground with these dudes. So all I really want to do is like get Delirium online. So Bobble sees a Kiora on top of their library. So we're going to Thought Seize, make sure that we're not like super dead to Kiora somehow. Karn and Forest. So we're in great shape here. Like they've got Kiora, but Kiora doesn't do anything without a payoff. Upkeep, they have to pay for packs, so they can't Kiora here. Trade off Burning Tree with their Burning Tree. And now we just get to start kind of like clearing up the board. Decided to kill the 2 untapped ones so I could get in with Ragavan. This 4/4 is still a 3-turn clock, so I'm not like under a ton of pressure to deal with it. But I think getting the Ragavan hit in, getting the extra mana, maybe an extra card is a little more relevant. And then Drown in the Lock's a really good pickup here. We've got them dead in the air next turn. We know they've got a Kiora and 1 unknown. So as long as the unknown isn't something like absurd, we're fine. Like we don't care about another Progenitor Ooze. We can counter Karn with Drown in the Lock. Kiora doesn't do anything. So we're in relatively good shape here. And opponent scoops it up on to game 2. Sideboarding against Mono Green Devotion. really was not sure what to sideboard here. I ended up taking out a couple Thoughtseize because on the draw I'm expecting a lot of Veil of Summer effects. Took out an Underworld Breach because they can always Karn for like a Grave Hate piece, and that would kind of suck for me. And then took out an Expressive Iteration because I just wanted to be a little bit faster, lower to the ground. Um, my board ends were like engineered explosives. I boarded in one Turok. Um, I know with Veil of Summer it can be a little awkward, but it's just another body I can have on the board. Like a 2-mana 2/1 is at least putting some sort of pressure. And if it's not a 2/1, then I can always wait and try to like follow up countering a Karn or something with kicking a Turok. Uh, and then the other two board ends were they were Alpine Moon, to name Nykthos, and a Terminate. Um, Terminate's not great against just like a storm creature, but I figured having a little extra removal is better than not. Weird that it put like the disconnect notification there. Alright, so first hand was like no lands, couldn't keep it. Second hand, we do have threat into threat. Possibility of kicking a Turok eventually. So no threat out of them in the first couple turns. Like this makes me think that they've got Veil of Summer. If they just went Forest go, Green Source go, literally have never seen this card in my life. It's just a Utopia Sprawl for 2 extra mana that adds 2 instead of 1. I think Wolf Willow Haven is the new one, like 1 and a green. Adds an extra green. Might just add 1 instead of 2, but I don't know. I feel like there's better options, but I don't play the deck. I don't know for sure. Go for the upkeep Lightning Bolt to try to scry into another land, which we do not hit, but Spell Pierce isn't the worst thing in the world. Burning Tree. So Burning Tree into Summoner's Pact. I decide to Spell Pierce the Pact so that they can't go get the 5 mana dude and play it out. If they have it in hand, they got it. But if they were going to pact for it, I can at least stop that. But instead, they go Kiora into Garruk into Karn, getting Snaring Bridge. That's terrifying. All we can really do now is try to draw into like a Thoughtseize. We can kill Karn. Round doesn't do anything here. We're about to get to the pseudo fun part of this match. Uh, by pseudo fun part of this match, I mean let's sit here and not do a ton for a while. Adjugantha. Uh, we do have 2 outs to Ensnaring Bridge. Option number 1 is we bolt them out with an Underworld Breach because we do still have a Breach in our deck. Option number 2 is Engineered Explosives to take out the bridge. There's a Breach. So we're definitely keeping that one. Take Summoner's Pact. You can have the Ooze. Opponent, I guess, is waiting for Storm Count. I decided to go ahead and breach now. I could wait, try to hit another red source to get like an extra bolt, but I'm so far away from having enough red to bolt them out that I think it's better to just dig for EE. So that's what we're gonna do, and this turn is gonna be. Oh, I'm gonna click through this pretty quick. This turn is just like digging for engineered explosives. Everything else doesn't matter. So we're just taking the fact that we can mill over 2 cards off Dragon's Rage Channeler to dig through a ton of cards in our deck. Uh, then we do end up unholy heating the Kiora to get that off the board. Garruk's not doing anything really scary. And we have to stop after a while because the Ledger Shredder has force triggers. If they double spell, if we double spell, it's got force triggers. So after I drew, I think 7 cards off my bauble, I can't really afford to like just throw away a couple extra turns by them being able to force my draws like this. The EE back Karn. Karn goes and gets Walking Ballista. That's fine. Play big ooze. The only thing I care about here is my mana. I need 3. If I find EE, I need 3 to cast the EE, 2 more to pop it in 1 turn, and then I've got 3, 6, 9, 14 flying power exactly. So we've got to kill Karn because we've got to be able to cast EE, which, if you didn't see, we just saw EE on top of our library. So we know we're drawing into EE next turn. I can't play a second spell because, again, Ledger Shredder forces the draw and discard. So if I play another spell, draw, discard, I go to 2 cards in deck. If they double spell, I draw and discard twice, and I deck myself. But they've got to pay for Pact here, which means they've got 4 mana available after Pact, this 4. So they can Walking Ballista for 2. That's important because Walking Ballista for 2 does not kill either of my Dragon's Rage channelers. They're going to go for Kiora instead, which is fine. And then finally, the fun part here is we do not have any more fetchables. So I've got 2 Water Graves here, 1 Blood Crypt, a 2nd Blood Crypt in my graveyard, 1 Vents, 2nd Vents in my yard, and both my Swamp and my Island are in exile. But they have played this lovely little Yavimaya that lets all my fetch lands tap for green. So now I get to use my my fetches to help cast an EE for 3. EE for 3 takes out Ewit, Overgrowth, Kiora, and Ensnaring Bridge. And we crack in for Lethal in the Air. Exacxies. So, match number 1 out of the way. Pretty fun one. I cannot say I was prepared for Mono Green Devotion. So, there's that. Match number 2. Lose another die roll. Hand's fine. It's a little slow, a little reactive, but it's got functional mana. It's got a turn 1 play. Turn 2 could be like Second Thought Seize plus removal or counter, or just play Ledger Shredder. They've got a good bit of like flexibility from here. And we should have known that our opponent, Arcbound Poppy, was going to be on Affinity. All right, so could lead with Ragavan here. My thought process is I don't want my opponent to have like Thought Cast, and if they play Artifact Land, they can play Thought Cast next turn. Um, Even worse if they play like Artifact Land, 1-drop or 0-drop, then Thought Cast because they have like Springleaf Drum as well. So I'm just gonna Thought Seize. Maybe I can take like a Thought Cast next turn, double up Ragavan plus Thought Seize, take a Thought Monitor, something like that. But if I wait on these Thought Seizes, they're just getting dead. Like they're more and more dead every turn I wait. And I am thankful that I Thought Seize because we see this Chalice of the Void. And if you know anything about Death's Shadow, you know that Chalice of the Void often means you don't get to play any more Magic. So Lightning Greaves off the top. Pretty fun one. Go ahead and take that Thought Monitor, leave them with a Springleaf Drum, get down Ragavan. And now we're just hoping that our opponent never sees a creature. They've got no more cards in hand, plenty of Springleaf Drums. We're going to double spell, get our Shredder trigger. Spell Pierce really not doing anything for me. Maybe I could have kept the Spell Pierce because realistically they only have 2 mana. So if they top deck like a Thought Monitor, or not Thought Monitor, Thought Cast, then we could counter it. All right, decide I'm okay trading Ragavan for Mimknight. Gives me Delirium for this Channeler. Plating is a little bit terrifying. All right, so this was a mess up. Well, not really a mess up. Probably with Unholy Heat, it's fine. But I didn't think about it until afterwards. So I attack all out here. Play just like a value breach to replay Ragavan, which I should not have done. I wanted the Ledger Shredder trigger, which is fine. But the mess up part here is I left myself dead to my opponent top decking exactly Thought Monitor. So they could 1 blue, 6 off the cost, cast Thought Monitor, equip it up with Lightning Greaves for free, or equip it up with Cranial Plating for 1, and then Lightning Greaves for free and attack me. So I should have just like held back the Ledger Shredder or something. The extra 3 damage didn't really matter. Like the clock wasn't changing, but I just gave my opponent like a way to kill me there that I didn't need to do. But I was kind of rushing through that game. So sideboard against Affinity. Took out a couple Spell Pierces, brought in 2 Dress Downs. Really great against Thought Monitor, against Etch Champion, Arcbound Ravager, anything with modular, stuff like that. Poured out a couple Ragavans because they've got so many like free and 1-drop dudes and stuff that stand in front of Ragavan. And then a Breach and an Iteration. Mostly because they're kind of slow, clunky cards, but also because if they're running Urza's Saga, they can easily get like Grave Hate or something. So Breach gets a lot worse. Brought in the 2 underworld, or the 2 Dress Downs, like I mentioned. Brought in an Engineered Explosives. So EE, 2 Terminates, 2 Dress Downs, and I'm not stalling for time to look it up. Alpine Moon. Alpine Moon to name like Urza Saga. We saw an Ink Moth Nexus off one of our Ragavan hits. So anything like that. Opening hand's reasonable. Ragavan on one. If they play like a Mimnite or something, we maybe drown to kill it on two, swing in with Ragavan. Tap land is great for us. Drown and lock a little bit awkward with Tormod's Crypt, but all right. And now we're kind of rolling. Like opponent took 2 turns to not really do anything crazy. We could play EE for 0 here and Thoughtcast, but I really don't think I want to like tap out here. Like I've got interaction. I don't really think I need to like put myself in a shields down position. We get kind of rewarded with an Arcbound Ravager. So not only do we get to kill the Ravager, we also get to draw a card. Could have been mana efficient and Unholy Heated on their turn, but not really a big deal. Started to drown there. They could Tormod's Crypt themselves to stop drowning the lock and resolve this chalice, and then I could like EE and clean it up afterwards. Or I could just let the chalice resolve, EE, use my treasures to blow it up and the crypt, and there's a pretty good likelihood that they're going to use that crypt to exile my graveyard if it's getting blown up, which is 10 times better for Drown in the Lock. So, play the EE, use the treasures to blow it up, and Tormod's Crypt, exiling my graveyard. Awesome. Do that before combat so I don't have to lose my treasure token that Ragavan makes. Decide to counter Sai. I could terminate the Sai, but if they have like Sai plus Welding Jar or Sai plus Chalice on 0, something like that, and make another 1/1, then Ragavan just gets stonewalled. So I think it's better to counter it. If Sai like created a trigger or something when it entered, I'd terminate. But since it doesn't, and I don't get a priority opportunity, I think it's better to just go ahead and kill it or counter it. All right. So Underworld Breach, not the best thing in the world here, but we do just have like a bit of pressure, and that's all we really need here. Add Gigantha. And then here we're going to terminate the construct before the Urza Saga trigger resolves, because I don't want them to be able to search out a Springleaf Drum and have extra mana to play something else. Like if they found the mana like that, so be it. But then here I could Underworld Breach and like terminate the Mimnite, or Underworld Breach, drown the Mimnite, something like that. Uh, which is fine, but I think I'm kind of like happy if they just decide to trade. So, but then when they don't trade, we're gonna kill the Midnight, kill it with fire. It's got to be like an easier way to do this. I hate how it like pops out the graveyard every time, or every time you try to interact with your graveyard, shifts everything over. All right, so Arcbound Ravager can get up to a 4/4. They've got the bridge, plating, Grafdigger's Cage. The Grafdigger's Cage is pretty much a free sacrifice. It's not really doing anything at the moment. The Misveil Plane or Misvault Bridge, whatever this thing um, is probably a pretty free sacrifice, but they more than likely want to keep like the plating around to help with the Arcbound Ravager. Maybe one shot me. Go for the bauble in the off chance that I see like a removal spell or something on top that I really want to cast. And just decide to put the pressure on. If they want to sack off half their board, then that's fine. Ultimately, they decide not to draw and concede. So I I don't know much to say about that game. Uh, I don't know what else was in their hand, but it felt like they just weren't seeing payoffs that they wanted. Like what those payoffs they wanted were, I'm not sure. But they saw Urza Saga, Psy, Arcbound, two Arcbound Ravagers, and it just didn't feel like any of them were really meshing well. So I'm guessing the rest of their hand was either like very subpar cards that didn't do anything to the board, but I'm not really sure what those would be. Um, yeah, really not positive. Could have been something like Springleaf Drum. Oh, they would have played Springleaf Drum, so I really don't know what the other two cards in hand were. I feel like just about anything's probably better than not playing anything. But either way, 2-0. Round number 3, lose another die roll. This modern thing's really tough when you can't win a die roll. Says the guy 2-0. Reasonable opening hand. We've got a 1-drop creature. We've got good interaction. We've got one of our card advantage mid-game spells. So Tron, 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 Tron. Oh boy. This is a decent, fair game hand. This is a horrendous Tron hand. Ancient Stirrings, hit the power plant. Another sphere. So I decide here just to hold up Drown in the Lock. Maybe we get lucky and they have to go for like a Sylvan Scrying and we get to counter that. If they're playing the map, I'm going to go ahead and counter it. If they had another land, if your plan is play the map, play the third land, crack the map, then that's fine. Like, that's a reasonable play. But there's no reason not to play the land first. Because if you can't do anything to search up your Tron land, and there's nothing else you can do, playing the land plays around Spell Pierce. It plays around, I guess, really, Spell Pierce is like it, but you get the idea. It plays around something. So if you're expecting your opponent to play perfectly, then to me, not playing the land before the map signals that they don't have a third land. In which case, countering this map is extremely important. Because not only does it get them the third land, it gets them the third Tron land. If you expect your opponent to not be making the optimal play here, then it's still countering a way to fetch a Tron land. Like, it's still good, but there's always the chance that they have like some sort of a follow up. But fortunately, Our opponent does not have the follow-up. Could have gone for the expressive iteration to grow the channeler. Um, ultimately, it's like the same damage. It's 3 versus 3. Actually, it would have been better to play. Well, we wouldn't have had the treasure. Probably better to play the iteration, actually. I get delirium. I still hit him for 3. I can hard cast Ragavan. The bright side would have been in this specific case, they wouldn't have had the map that we exiled off the top, or they would have gotten the map, but drawing the map still put them like 2 turns off of Tron. Ichor Wellspring. So I've never seen a Tron list with Ichor Wellspring. Never seen it. So my guess is this has to be something more than just Tron, because there is 0 reason for mono green Tron to play Ichor Wellspring. I have no idea what the reason is that my opponent is playing Ichor Wellspring, but that one just like changes my entire opinion of what's going on here. Decide to keep Spell Pierce, a reasonable hit for me. And then I'm actually going to go Thought Seize, Hold Up, Pierce. Or am I going, no, Ragavan, Thought Seize. No, Ragavan, Hold Up, Pierce. Why did I make that play? Like, the Pierce is obviously very valuable in case they have ways of finding Tron. I can interact with those. If they have a 3rd land and they go like Karn, go get bridge, I can counter the bridge. Why did I not Thought Seize? Like, I think it was just to get down the extra threat and hold up Spell Pierce. I mean, I know as soon as I see Spell Pierce, I want to hold that up. Because there's so many good hits my opponent can have that either help them get Tron, or even if they do hit Tron, can make my life kind of awkward. Alright, so bobble them and see Grinding Station. And Drown and Lock's the perfect card. That's essentially what I've been looking for as a way to counter like a Karn heads up. So this is Aspiring Spikes, Semblance Anvil Tron list. I've watched all of 30 seconds of this deck, maybe. But the idea is you can use like Semblance Anvil, exile some sort of artifact. So like in this case, they could exile a Mirror Retriever. They can play out Grinding Station, like play Mirror Retriever for free, and Grinding Station and Mirror Retriever for free. Sack the Mirror Retriever to go get like one of their free artifacts back. In this case, maybe like a map. To play it for free, and then play another Mirror Retriever for free, untap the Grinding Station, sack the Retriever, get back Sphere, whatever. Uh, what I mean is just they can go super hard on kind of KCIing you off, and they have things like Mystic Forge, Karn the Great Creator to go get payoffs out of their sideboard. And then they do have some infinite combos with a couple sideboard pieces that I could not begin to tell you what the names of them are. But for instance, if my opponent untaps and found a 3rd land, they could do something like I mentioned the Semblance Anvil, Grinding Station, Mirror Retriever, blah blah blah. If they have an extra turn, then second Anvil plus like Grinding Station, Scrap Trawler would allow them to like sack Mirror Retriever, get back uh, some other artifacts. Like second Mirror Retriever, get back first Mirror Retriever, and some other artifact, and pretty much go close to infinite. Like at the moment, not infinite because all they're doing is like sacking a. Or they do have a star. They can actually sack the star, so they could go infinite from here, right? Or draw their whole deck. If they go next turn, land, anvil, exile, mirror retriever. Turn after that, anvil. If they drew an artifact, exile it. Play grinding station. Play sack Ichor Wellspring. Play mirror retriever. Or play scrap trawler. Play mirror retriever. Sack untap grinding station. Sack mirror retriever. Get back like chromatic sphere with retriever, get back star with scrap trawler. They can play the star, stack it to the grinding station. It untaps itself. Then they play another mirror retriever, sack it. The mirror retriever targets the first mirror retriever in the yard, gets it back. The scrap trawler targets star, gets it back, and they just get to keep looping by playing the mirror retriever they get back and star, sacking both to grinding station, and they would just have to like find a win condition from there. But they could get they could draw their entire deck. They could play artifacts up to 4 for free. So they could play Mystic Forge. Yeah, they could find somewhere to win from there. I'd hope. But either way, we're going to Thoughtseize them, take a Semblance Anvil. We know we're drawing into Drown in the Lock, so we are countering the hell out of another Anvil that we see. Which they do find the third land. They go for the Anvil, we go for the Drown, and that's all she wrote for game 1. So really glad we got that extra turn or two to see that it was Anvil Tron and not normal Tron. For the most part, the sideboarding doesn't really change, but what kind of hands we're looking for does. Take out a couple expressive iterations, couple unholy heats, and underworld breach. Breach because they can Karn for grave hate easily. Expressive iteration because we're on the draw against a Tron deck, like we need to go fast. And then unholy heat really doesn't do anything. Like it kills a artifact creature, but that's not exactly a downside for them. Bringing in 2 dress downs stops like mirror retriever, stops scrap trawler. At least they can't go off for a turn. Bring in Alpine Moon to help name Tron lands, and bring in the other 2 spell pierces to help fight over any non-land card that can come out early. Opening hand, no lands. Ship it. Oh, 2 lands, but no red producing. But on the draw, we've got an Alpine Moon, so we've got like some fight here. Pass and hold up spell pierce. Counter that. Dash Ragavan. Go ahead and play out Alpine Moon. Name the Tron land they don't currently have out. I don't really know if there's a huge reason for them to be like holding on to all of their maps, but they do end up going to get Beseiju here. We can blow up Alpine Moon. We will definitely shock in another land. Then grinding stations. They've got a map, grinding station, 2 cards in hand, drawing up to the third. Side to EE just for the shredder trigger. Like if I go EE on 1 and blow up map, then they can just fetch in response, sack the map, search for something. If I go EE on 2, I blow up grinding station, but I lose my ledger shredder and I can't do anything else this turn. So Karn's like, if we were 1 mana, if we had 1 more mana and could have Karned, then I think that would kind of end the game as well. Not in the game, but be a really good piece for us. So second map got Inventor's Fair. Karn gets a Cityscape Leveler. I have to believe there's a better target they could get than Leveler right there. So they had 3 mana because they ended up adding Gigantha to hand. 5 mana with a Karn. Like, I don't know for sure that they have a better target, but feel like there's got to be one. Not that Leveler's like gonna lose them the game or anything, but I want to believe there's a better target than Leveler there. All right, so scoop to that. And game 3, I'll hit the play button because we literally just sat here for 8 minutes and the game ended because opponent left or disconnected or something. Either way, we had a pretty good opening hand here. Just like Steam Vents, Ragavan, Bauble, turn 2, either drown something or Alpine Moon, whatever. Got a redraw off Bauble. Like any hand that starts off with a Ragavan is going to be pretty solid. But we'll never know because, again, opponent disconnected. Round 4, we're 3-0. I played against this opponent the other day too. I have no idea what they were on. Cannot remember, but I know I played against them. Reasonable hand. We win a die roll, which is really nice. But we get down a Channeler. Blood or Blackcleave Cliffs into Thoughtseize. So it could be Scam. It could be, or they revealed Gigantha, so it's not Scam because they can't play Grief or Fury. Could be like Jund mid range, Jund Saga, some sort of like Rakdos mid range, but they're usually playing Dothy or Liliana, something like that. So kind of expecting some sort of a Saga deck. Overgrown Tomb, Shocked In. Doesn't really tell me anything. If they want to kill the channeler in response to this, that's fine. I couldn't stop a terminate anyway, so. Spell Pierce, actually a reasonable pickup. So if they try to do something ahead of curve, like maybe a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, we get to interact with it. Speak of the devil. Click away. Don't want to crack Bauble until their turn if I can avoid it. Kill the monkey. All right. I do not want a another land. Breach is a pretty good pickup. And we're definitely just going for a value breach here. Like, I'm against a hand disruption deck, so the last thing I want to do is like keep breach sitting around in hand and risk my opponent just finding like a thought seize. And I kind of miscounted there. I really wanted to breach plus bauble with the channeler plus shadow, but I was a card short off of that. Like, ironically, here, if I had waited, this would have been such a good breach because I would have been able to like drown the token, bolt them, untap. If I found another land, I could just like triple spell. But they had the thought seize, so I wouldn't have gotten the breach anyway. Uh, so good call casting the breach. All I'm trying to say there. Take the value breach. And then, of course, thought seize bug. Opponent takes bolt. We draw a bolt. Draw a bolt. Flip over a scalding tarn that gives us delirium. You know, just how we drew it up. Counter a Fable. Decide to keep the Channeler on top. And their last unknown card is a Nihil Spellbomb. Worst thing possible with Channeler. They could have just played the Nihil Spellbomb first, so that if I wanted to drown, I had to fight over that, and that would allow them to just play out the Fable. I think they knew my last card was a drown. They thought seized me on like turn 1 and saw drown shadow. So they knew my card. There's no way I'm letting a Fable resolve over a Nihil Spellbomb if given the option. So Reflection of Kiki Jiki plus Soul of Windgrace. And you know us, we high roll the Unholy Heat off the top, kill the Reflection, that gives us a lethal on board. So win game 1 in very, very lucky top deck fashion. Uh, board out all my thought seizes, board out a drown underworld breach because of we just saw main deck Nihil Spellbomb. Thought seize because it's a like mid range hand disruption mirror, so you really want your top decks to be better than your opponents. Board in Alpine Moon for Urza's Saga that we saw there towards the end. Boarded in the 3 Terminates for things like Tarmogoyf, Construct Token, Soul of Windgrace, and boarded in Engineered Explosives and the 2 unlicensed hearses. EE mostly to help deal with like constructs, Ren and 6, things like that, and the 2 hearses to deal with their graveyard, stop them from Ren looping, can fight over Soul of Windgrace triggers, whatever. But more importantly, if they're running like Ren, Unholy Heat, stuff like that. And it's just another threat. On the draw. Opening hand's fine. Inquisition takes our hearse. Biggest fear for me here is playing out Ragavan and my opponent just goes like turn 2 Ren down tick. So I'm actually going to play out the Channeler over the Ragavan on turn 1. The Ragavan would be like the better play, but again, Ren down tick just means like kind of pointless. Double fatal push. Plus a chunky Tarmogoyf. Let's just double bolt the Goyf. Feels pretty terrible, but at least at the moment it's like 2 cards to 2 cards ish. Go to fatal push our Ragavan, so we're just going to drown their Goyf. I could counter the fatal push and keep my Ragavan around, but kind of whatever. They add Giganta. We're going to follow suit and add our Giganta. So they're looking more like a shadow deck than we are right now. Like Thoughtseize Inquisition, triple fatal push, double Tarmogoyf. Could play out the EE on 1 last turn, but decided to wait. But if our opponent gives us 2 EE targets, I'm not going to pass up the opportunity for a 2-for-1. Like they've already 2-for-1'd us with having to double bolt the Goyf. So we might as well take our 2-for-1 back. And not that the Shadow Spear like really was doing that much. You get the idea. There's 4th bolt. Like all I'm really looking for now is like what's it called? Underworld Breach. Bolt untap breach. But I don't want to just like throw off these bolts just in case they have Ragavan or something. But then obviously Soul Guide Lantern kind of wrecks the whole breach idea. So you're just sitting around doing nothing. Spell Bomb. Graveyard is dead. Down Shadow. Opponent goes for the bolt. We get to bolt ourselves. Kind of a weird one because they know about the bolts as well. They Thoughtseized us and saw double bolt in an Unholy Heat earlier. Like they know I've got the lightning bolts. Table is fine. Fetch land there would have been lethal. Decided to keep the Shredder on top so that I could double spell next turn. That was like worst case scenario for us is getting 2-for-1 again. So that's kind of like the name of this matchup is just who's gonna 2-for-1 more. And that feels horrendous. Flipping over the EI. Which they find the heat. Come on. And then not really a reason to hold out the land. Dash in just to get a creature off the board. Then once they find Hearse, it's game over. Doesn't help that our 3 draws there were like land, Ragavan. So iteration wouldn't have done a ton for us, but still a card we'd rather have in hand than in the graveyard. But either way, that match really just felt like my opponent had more than enough removal. Triple fatal push. Bolt heat, EE, terminate. Like, we just couldn't stick a threat around. We don't really have any threats that are great into that anyway. But that's how it goes sometimes. Either way, game 3. I think the only change I made was I brought in the 2 Turoks, boarded out a channeler, and boarded out one of the hearses. So I brought out one of the hearses because most of their deck, uh, I haven't seen a Wren yet. Most of their deck doesn't really care about the graveyard outside of the Unholy Heats. Everything else was just fine without it. So I was kind of skeptical of going too hard there. And then boarded out one of the channelers because of just how much grave hate they were running. Like, they were running Nihil Spellbomb, Soul Guide Lantern, Unlicensed Hearse. Like, they really do not want anybody to have a graveyard. 4 lands, no creature, no lands. Reasonable 5. We at least get to start off with Ragavan, so maybe if they don't have an answer for Ragavan, we can do something. But I think the likelihood that they don't have an answer for Ragavan is so low. Then not having blue or anything for expressive iteration is pretty rough here. I decided to hold on to the bauble. Like, I could sack it and give myself delirium, but then they just have unlicensed hearse. So if that's my plan, I might as well hold on to the bauble and use it correctly. Bolt for a channeler. Really hoping for like a Tarmogoyf here, but I kind of assume that if they've got the heat plus the bolt, they're not playing any sort of threat last turn, that their hand is just like all removal spells. And then we see Fatal Push off the top of their library, so. Giganta. Soul of Windgrace. Well, I guess on the bright side, we do have a Terminate for that. And we can hold up Drown in the Lock for basically nothing since they've got the hearse out. Play out the E on 2, which immediately gets Besaju'd. On the bright side with this Beseju, we at least have like Drown in the Lock for 2 available. But again, with this hearse, makes it kind of difficult. Stash Ragavan. At least get some something out. Thoughtseize Terminate, Fatal Push the Shadow, plus another Soul of Windgrace. Or no, this is just Giganta. Giganta to crew the hearse and kill us. Yeah. Just kind of had everything there. Like having the Unholy Heat for Ragavan on 1, the hearse to shut off our Dragon's Rage Channeler on 2. Another Bolt for Channeler on 3. Beseju for our EE. Thoughtseize for the Terminate there. Like, everything I felt like I was doing was covered that match. And it's really funny because the namesake card of this deck, the Urza Sagas, did not do a thing. Like they beat us by being just Jun mid range. Um, Fable was okay. Hearst shut us down pretty hard, but they absolutely won that match just being Jun mid range, which is one of Death Shadow's like worst matchups. Just a deck that can 2-for-1 you every step of the way. But on to match 5. 3-1. We win the die roll. Looking for a little revenge. Threat into removal spell threat. Kind of hard to throw back that kind of hand. Spire Bluff Canal makes me assume that we're up against mURktide. Go ahead and get Shredder down. Shredder of their own. So we'll go ahead and bolt the Shredder on our upkeep. That way we get our first spell out of the way. We get a Channeler trigger. Get to Surveil, try to set up our draw a little bit. And then here we can actually Thought Seize to trigger the Ledger Shredder, discard like a Shadow or something to turn on Delirium, and grow our Ledger Shredder. So, and I do like Expressive Iteration more than a Shadow here. Like I'm still going to get to play out a Shadow this turn. So it's not like I'm losing all of my Shadow stock. But we saw mURktide, Brazen Borrower, Spell Pierce, Ragavan. I don't care about the Ragavan because I got the Shadow. Brazen Borrower could be a little annoying if they're able to like bounce Shredder, flash in, trade with Channeler or something. Spell Pierce, I don't really care about. Like I've got the board presence at the moment, and we know that Polluted Delta was their draw for turn right there. All right. I gotta mention this attack here. So I think that the only way I lose the game from here is if my opponent like petty thefts something and gets in a Ragavan attack. So I'm afraid that if I attack with everything, they just take 8, go to 5. They have Spell Pierce for my iteration or my breach. Petty theft can bounce something into turn just to slow down the clock, and then Ragavan hits. And if they get like Ragavan hit removal spell and get to go kill my Shadow, flash in Borrower to block the Channeler, they still have Ragavan around, then I feel like that's how things snowball and I lose. So I decide to just attack with the Channeler so I can hold back 2 creatures. The Brazen Borrower, the Petty Theft, doesn't put me into Ragavan attacking range. I know their hand completely. Uh, so I could just go for like a value breach or something and make them blow the Spell Pierce, which I'm pretty sure is what I end up doing. Well, I go for iteration. I think I actually should have gone for breach here. Well, no. If I go for breach and they just like spell pierce whatever I get, I could breach for shadow. So that's what I should have done. I should have gone for breach here. And if they let it resolve, I just play shadow. Um, but I went for iteration because I knew that they would spell pierce this, and I would be able to keep my 2 threats on board, so petty theft doesn't really like mess me up. Then tackle out to force the Brazen Borrower here. Spell Snare. Your one blind card is main deck Spell Snare. And now I'm kind of having that moment of like, crap, this is how I fall behind. Like I said, Ragavan hits a live spell off my library with the Ledger Shredder. Now they have like Shredder to block Shadow, Brazen Borrower to block Dragon's Rage Channeler. And just like this is where it starts to kind of slowly unravel. uh Attack in with both. They have to double block or they die. They choose not to double block, so now I just get to Underworld Breach for Lightning Bolt and kill them. But that's why we attacked first, was get to trade off everything, and then I could go like Shredder plus Ragavan or something, um, which is completely reasonable. Or I could go Breach, Thoughtseize, Breach, Bolt, kill the Ragavan, something like that. But if they didn't block one of them, it gave me the option of just Breach, Bolt, kill. So all that to say, I don't think there is really anything lost by not just attacking. If I had another land, it changes up my line a little bit. Because then maybe I start looking at like Dash Ragavan or just pre-combat Breach Bolt something. Or I guess if I had another land, I could just Breach double bolt them. Whatever. Sideboarding against mURktide. Board out, or at least I board out all the Drowns, all the Thoughtseizes, a couple Channelers. They've got like hearses and stuff coming in, so the graveyard's a little bit of a liability. Drown and Lock and Thoughtseize. Drown's terrible against mURktide. Thoughtseize is terrible as a top deck later in the game. Board in a 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Spell Pierce, one of the 2 Dress Downs. You'll see them like boarding out of mURktide occasionally because they're afraid of Grave Hate. So Dress Down gets a little bit worse. Board in the Engineered Explosives, 2 Unlicensed Hearses. I think that's it. This is like my heavy sideboard matchup. Opening hands, good. Couple pieces of spot removal, interaction for like a Blood Moon. Got our late game payoff and Breach. Bobble ourselves, see a Blood Crypt we don't want on top. So if I had seen something I wanted on top, I would prefer to have the Steam Vents down right here so I could Spell Pierce an Unlicensed Hearse. But I would rather have the Scry and the better draw and risk them having the hearse. So, Lightning Bolt in response to the Bobble, or in response to the Shredder trigger. And they discard an Expressive Iteration, which is absolutely terrifying to me. That's by far one of the best cards in the matchup. So I just don't know what they could have if they're discarding Expressive Iteration. So they start getting basic islands, pretty big telltale sign of Blood Moon. They consider, and they put the second Expressive Iteration in the yard. So like, my only guess here is that they've got a mURktide and they're trying to make it a 7 or an 8/8 as like fast as possible, because there is no good reason to discard Expressive Iteration in this matchup, especially if we're in a position like this, like a board stall, and I'm not putting pressure on you. Like, those iterations are just winning you the game. Now, I've seen both of my basics, so at least I'm kind of protected from Blood Moon. That's fourth iteration. Decided to just let them pay so they can't double spell here. We go for the value breach while they're tapped down. Like, not the most exciting breach in the world, but it just gives us a couple cards here. Which we see they're drawing into counterspell. They did not bend the counterspell, so I know they're drawing into it. Five cards in hand. They have not missed a land drop. They've got a counterspell. So my assumption, since they didn't spell snare my breach, my assumption right now is their hand is some number of like spell pierce. Uh, they've got the counterspell, lands, and maybe like a blood moon because they have gotten a couple basic islands. EE down on one just to help with like Ragavan and stuff. I could play the EE out on three, but if it's not hitting Blood Moon, it's doing literal nothing on three. So I really don't want to proactively play it out on three, but I'm trying to set up a lethal string of lightning bolts here. So I kind of want to save the lightning bolts from going towards a Ragavan or a Dragon's Rage Channeler. Just down the shredder so they can't get a connive trigger. And we're just going to go ahead and kill that. So the breach bolt plan looking a little bit worse here. Not a ton worse, but a non-zero amount. That should have been my other guess, is that their hand was just full of like unholy heats or lightning bolts. Because I haven't been playing out creatures, so they've got a counter spell. They have started missing a land drop now, which they could be holding, but I don't think there's like a huge reason to hold lands here. Not when you play like expressive iteration, but I guess they've gone through all four of their iterations. They might be playing Archmage's Charm. There's the Blood Moon finally. Alright. So I'm going to click through a bit because all of this is just like draw go, draw go, draw go. I've got the Underworld Breach, and I've got enough red sources now to bolt them out with Breach. If I can get cards into my graveyard and them not have like a grave hate piece, but the only way that it works is if Underworld Breach resolves. So with Breach and Spell Pierce, I can't fight over Counterspell. So all I'm doing now is trying to wait out my opponent and get them to play like a mURktide or uh, something that causes them to tap off two of their three blue. So when you see all this draw going, that is the only thing that I'm waiting for, is trying to get a position to resolve this Underworld Breach. And then I thought this was kind of a funny spot. My opponent plays Relic, which obviously, like, ow. That wrecks my entire plan. Um, try to bait with Shredder. Third Unholy Heat. Go for both them just to get the connive trigger. Like, no real other reason. Like, I've got Terminate, so I'm not terrified of tapping off of removal. And if they decide to like counterspell my terminate, then that sets me up for breach potentially. Here I go for crack EE on their upkeep. Uh, I wanted to do it on their upkeep before they got to their draw step in case they don't have anything grave dependent in hand, don't draw a grave dependent spell, then they could just like sack the relic and not care about it. But I'm kind of hoping that they just won't crack the relic, and they don't. So now it's like, okay, you probably have a mURktide in hand. We know they've got the counter spell, but I'm really assuming there's a mURktide in hand. And they're just trying to wait till they draw like another blue source. I keep seeing these like one blue spells and just hoping they'll go for a second one. I know they're not going to tap off counter spell, but gotta hope. Gotta play to your outs. Flusterstorm's like not the worst pickup. Maybe I find some extra lands and I can just like Shadow plus something plus Underworld Breach. They counter a Flusterstorm and they can't pay for it. So more. And this, if they didn't sack the relic in response to me blowing up the EE, I think the Unlicensed Hearse is a big enough deal that it's going to grab a counter spell. At least I really hope it is. And they do, so it's all in on Underworld Breach. Now, if they got a spell snare, they got a spell snare, and I probably can't win the game from there. But they do not. And we go for the bolt out. So fortunate. Could have paid the black for the Underworld Breach instead of the red. But I'm kind of hoping that if they have a way to fight over a bolt, then Flusterstorm might do something. Like if they've got Mystical Dispute to counter a bolt, then I just Flusterstorm that. But probably would have been correct. Like, I don't need this black for anything. I was more expecting them to like counter the Underworld Breach. Like if they spell snare the Underworld Breach and then I can't kill them this turn, then I probably want the black to be able to hold up Terminate. So if they play mURktide, I can end of turn Terminate, untap Terminate again. So hit or miss. Either way, ended up that league 4-1 yet again. I swear it's like 7 or 8 straight leagues of 4-1. I just can't seem to get a different result. But our one loss was to Jun Saga. I think I'll take that. Like, again, Jun Saga is just going to be 2-for-1 dot deck, and you're going to have a pretty rough time against that regardless. But main deck working fine. Ledger Shredder looked a little bit better in that league than it has in some of the previous ones. Underworld Breach looked really good. Was a win condition against mURktide. We had it as a value piece a couple times. Really dug us against Mono Green Devotion to find that E. Sideboard. I think I do want the second EE. It looked good that league, so probably want the second one, or maybe if you wanted to run like a K command or something. Some other shatter effect. Arn is too popular, and now if I have to deal with Semblance, Anvil, Tron everywhere, then I want an extra shatter effect. So thanks, Spike, for calling that one. Either way, I hope this video helps some of you. Again, if you got any questions, comments, whatever, feel free to leave them in the YouTube channel chat or hop on over, check out a live stream. Catch y'all later.